Blood painted the sky crimson as Zara Russell stumbled off the stagecoach at Weaverville, California, her swollen belly the only thing keeping her upright as she collapsed onto the dusty depot platform. The year was 1873, and in the California mining town nestled among pine-covered mountains, a woman alone might as well have been wearing a target on her back. "Worthless whore!" a man's voice boomed across the depot as his fist connected with her jaw. "Thought you could run, did ya?" Thomas Blackford, her husband's business partner and the father of the child she carried, had followed her from San Francisco, the child he'd demanded she get rid of before his wife discovered their affair. The few bystanders at the late afternoon depot turned away, unwilling to involve themselves in what they assumed was a domestic dispute. Zara's vision blurred as another blow caught her in the ribs. She curled protectively around her 7-month belly, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered, tasting blood. "The baby. There ain't gonna be no baby when I'm done with—" "That's enough." The voice cut through the air like a whip crack, low and dangerous. Through her tears, Zara saw a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, the man moved with deliberate steps toward them. His spurs clinked softly against the wooden platform. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Thomas snarled. "You beating a pregnant woman makes it my business." The stranger's voice remained calm, but there was steel behind it. "Step away from her, now." "Or what?" Thomas balled his fists, bloodied from striking Zara. What happened next occurred so swiftly Zara could barely follow it. The cowboy moved like lightning, one moment standing yards away, the next driving his fist into Thomas's stomach. As the larger man doubled over, the cowboy delivered an uppercut that sent him sprawling. Thomas scrambled to his feet, reaching for something inside his coat. The cowboy's hand flashed to his hip, and suddenly a Colt revolver was pointed between Thomas's eyes. "Make a choice," the cowboy said quietly, "and make it carefully." Thomas's face contorted with rage, but self-preservation won out. "This ain't over," he spat, backing away. He shot one last hateful glance at Zara before stumbling toward the saloon across the street. Only when Thomas disappeared through the swinging doors did the cowboy holster his weapon. He turned to Zara, who had slumped against a post, one arm still wrapped protectively around her middle. "Madam," he said, his voice gentler now as he knelt beside her, "you're hurt." Zara tried to speak, but a wave of pain and dizziness washed over her. She felt warm liquid trickling down her legs, and panic seized her heart. "The baby," she gasped. "Please, my baby." Without hesitation, the cowboy shrugged out of his long duster coat and wrapped it carefully around her trembling shoulders. His movements were surprisingly tender for hands that had just dispatched a man twice his size. "I've got you," he said, helping her to her feet. When her knees buckled, he swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Name's Reese O'Malley. I'm taking you to Doc Wilcox." Zara tried to focus on his face as he carried her across the street. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into several days' growth of beard. "Zara," she managed. "Zara Russell." "Hold on, Miss Russell," he said, his stride quickening as she winced with another pain. "Just hold on." The doctor's office sat at the end of Weaverville's main street, a small wooden building with a faded sign swinging in the evening breeze. Reese kicked the door open with his boot, startling the elderly man behind the desk. "Doc, she's bleeding," Reese said without preamble. Dr. Wilcox took one look at Zara and immediately cleared his examination table. "Put her here. What happened?" "Man at the depot. Beat her pretty bad." The doctor's face hardened as he helped Zara onto the table. "I'll need to examine her. Wait outside." Reese hesitated, looking at Zara with concern in his eyes. "Please," she whispered, clutching his hand. "Don't leave." She couldn't explain why she trusted this stranger, only that the thought of being alone terrified her more than anything. The cowboy nodded, then turned to face the wall as the doctor began his examination. Zara bit back cries of pain as gentle fingers probed her swollen abdomen. You're having contractions, Dr. Wilcox said grimly. But you're not fully dilated. The baby's coming, but it's too early. Fresh fear washed over her. Can you stop it? I'll try. Mr. O'Malley, I need hot water and clean linens. Mrs. Patterson across the street keeps house for me. Reese left reluctantly, returning minutes later with a gray-haired woman who took charge with brisk efficiency. For the next several hours, they worked to stop Zara's labor, with Reese stationed outside the curtained area. Each time a cry escaped her lips, Zara heard his boots shift anxiously on the wooden floor. Near midnight, the contractions finally subsided. Dr. Wilcox emerged from behind the curtain, wiping his hands on a towel. The baby's still with us, he told Reese, but she needs rest, complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. I can't, Zara called weakly from the bed. I have no money, nowhere to stay. Reese stepped around the doctor and approached her bedside. The boarding house has rooms. I can't afford, I'll pay, he said simply. Zara stared at him in disbelief. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Something flickered in his storm gray eyes. Let's just say I've seen enough innocent people suffer in this world. The next morning, Reese carried Zara to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house at the edge of town. The matronly widow took one look at Zara's bruised face and swollen belly and immediately prepared her finest room. You just rest, dear, she said, plumping pillows and arranging blankets. I'll bring up some broth shortly. When they were alone, Zara finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why are you in Weaverville, Mr. O'Malley? Reese stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunlight. I'm scouting land, looking to start a horse ranch. You're not just passing through? He turned to face her. No, madam. I've spent 10 years drifting. Thought it might be time to put down some roots. Zara nodded, wincing as she shifted position. That man at the depot, he's dangerous. He'll be looking for me. Let him look, Reese said, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. He won't get near you again. For the next week, Reese visited daily, bringing books, flowers from Mrs. Holloway's garden, and news from town. He spoke little of himself, but Zara gathered he'd fought in the war, ridden with cattle drives in Texas, and prospected in the Dakota Territory before coming to California. On her 10th day of bed rest, Zara finally shared her own story. How she'd been working as a seamstress in San Francisco after her parents died. How Thomas Blackford had charmed her with promises of marriage, only to reveal after she became pregnant that he was already married to a wealthy shipping magnate's daughter. He wanted me to get rid of the baby, she said, tears welling in her eyes. When I refused, he threatened me, said no one would believe a poor seamstress over him, so I took what little money I had and fled. You're safe now, Reese said, his voice firm with conviction. But the next morning, reality shattered their fragile sense of security. Reese arrived at the boarding house to find Mrs. Holloway in a state of agitation. That awful man's been asking all over town about her, she whispered, wringing her apron, saying she stole from him, that she's wanted in San Francisco. Some folks are starting to talk. Reese's jaw tightened. Where is he now? The saloon. He's hired 2 rough-looking men, gunmen by the look of them. Reese took the stairs 2 at a time, finding Zara sitting by the window, her face pale with worry. You've heard, she said. We need to leave town, he replied, already gathering her few possessions. My horse is out back. Can you ride? I grew up on a farm in Missouri, she said, struggling to her feet. I can ride. They slipped out the back doors, the first fingers of dawn stretched across the sky. Reese helped her onto his dappled gray stallion, then swung up behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. They rode north along forest trails, avoiding the main roads where Thomas might have set watches. By midday, they reached a small hunting cabin Reese had discovered during his land scouting. It's abandoned, he explained, helping her dismount, but it's sturdy enough. We can rest here while I figure out our next move. The cabin was simple, 1 room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow bed covered with a dusty quilt. Reese busied himself building a fire, while Zara sank gratefully onto a wooden chair. "You said our next move," she noted quietly. Reese paused, a log in his hands. "I did." "Why are you doing this, Reese? Putting yourself in danger for me?" He placed the log carefully on the growing fire before answering. "When I saw you at that depot, something inside me just knew I couldn't walk away." He met her eyes across the small space. "I've been walking away all my life, Zara. From the war, from family, from setting down roots. But I can't walk away from you." The simple honesty of his words brought tears to her eyes. No man had ever spoken to her with such unvarnished truth. "I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. "No money, no family name, just myself and a child that isn't yours." "That's more than enough," he said, and the look in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. They stayed at the cabin for 3 days, Reese hunting for food and riding into nearby settlements for supplies. Each evening, they talked by the fire. He told her about growing up on a failing Kentucky farm, about losing his parents to typhoid, about the horrors he'd witnessed during the war. She spoke of her dreams of opening her own dress shop someday, of giving her child the stable home she'd lost when her parents died. On the 4th morning, Reese returned from checking his horse to find Zara doubled over in pain. "It's the baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Terror seized him. They were miles from the nearest town, from any doctor. "I'm taking you back to Weaverville." "No." Her fingers dug into his arm. "Thomas is there. He'll kill us both." "Then I'll get the doctor to come here." "There's no time," she moaned as another contraction gripped her. "The baby's coming now." Reese had helped birth countless foals and calves during his years working ranches, but the thought of delivering Zara's child terrified him more than facing down a dozen gunmen. Still, he forced himself to remain calm as he prepared the bed, heated water, and tore strips from his spare shirt for bandages. For hours, Zara labored, her cries echoing through the small cabin. Reese stayed by her side, wiping her brow, offering what comfort he could. When her strength began to flag, he held her hand and whispered encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Zara Russell. You can do this." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Zara gave one final push, and the cabin filled with the thin wail of a newborn. "A boy," Reese said, his voice choked with emotion as he wrapped the tiny infant in a clean cloth. "You have a son." Zara wept as Reese placed the child in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," she whispered, cradling him close. She looked up at Reese, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "Would you like to hold him?" Reese hesitated, then carefully took the small bundle. The baby fit in his large, calloused hands as if made for them. Something fierce and protective bloomed in his chest as the tiny fingers curled around his thumb. "What will you name him?" he asked softly. Zara watched them together, her heart full. "Matthew," she said. "It means gift of God." They spent 2 more days at the cabin, allowing Zara to regain some strength. Reese proved surprisingly adept with the infant, changing makeshift diapers and walking the floor when Matthew cried at night. On the 3rd morning after the birth, Reese returned from checking the perimeter to find Zara sitting up in bed, nursing Matthew. "We need to move on," he said, averting his eyes respectfully. "I heard riders on the main road yesterday. Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances." Zara nodded, adjusting her clothing as Matthew finished feeding. "Where will we go?" "I've been thinking about that." He sat beside her on the bed. "I've saved enough to buy a small spread about 50 miles north of here. Good water, decent grazing land. I was on my way to look at it when I met you." "Your ranch," she said, remembering his dream. "It could be our ranch," he said quietly. "If you wanted." Zara's breath caught. "Reese, I can't ask you to take responsibility for another man's child." "You're not asking." I'm offering. He took her free hand in his. I know it's sudden. We barely know each other. But sometimes life doesn't give you the luxury of time. His eyes held hers, sincere and unwavering. I'm falling in love with you, Zara. With both of you. Tears filled her eyes. In the span of 2 weeks, this quiet, honorable man had shown her more kindness than she'd known in years. And something had grown between them in those long talks by the fire, in the way he'd stood beside her through Matthew's birth, in the tender way he held her son. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted. But what about Thomas? He won't stop looking for us. Reese's expression hardened. A man like that has enemies. Sooner or later he'll make a mistake. In the meantime, we'll be careful. The ranch is remote. Few people know about it. That afternoon, they left the cabin, Zara riding on Reese's horse with Matthew nestled in a sling across her chest. They traveled slowly, taking back trails and crossing streams to hide their tracks. Each night, they camped under the stars, Reese keeping watch while Zara and Matthew slept. On the 3rd day of their journey, they crested a hill and Reese reined in his horse. Below them stretched a valley, green with spring grass bisected by a clear stream. A small cabin stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees, and beyond it a corral and barn. There it is, Reese said. Not much to look at yet, but good bones. Zara took in the peaceful valley, the mountains rising in the distance, the clean sweep of open sky. It's beautiful, she breathed. As they approached the cabin, an elderly man emerged from the barn. He waved as they rode up, his weathered face splitting in a grin. Thought you might not come back, he called to Reese. Changed my mind about selling? No, Mr. Jenkins. Just had some unexpected business. Reese dismounted, then helped Zara down. This is Miss Russell and her son Matthew. The old rancher's eyebrows rose, but he tipped his hat politely. Madam. Didn't realize O'Malley here was a family man. Recent development? Reese said with a smile. We'd like to see the property again, if you don't mind. Jenkins showed them around the small ranch, 20 acres of good grazing land, a spring-fed stream that never ran dry, the cabin with its stone fireplace and sturdy walls. It needed work, but Zara could already see its potential. That evening, after Jenkins left with Reese's down payment in his pocket and a promise to return with the deed, they stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. What do you think? Reese asked, his arm around her shoulders. Could you be happy here? Zara looked up at him, at the man who had saved her life and her son's, who had offered them a home in his heart. I already am happy, she said softly. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, their first, as Matthew slept peacefully in Zara's arms. When they finally pulled apart, Reese rested his forehead against hers. I want to do right by you, Zara, by both of you. When we get settled, will you marry me? Yes, she whispered without hesitation. Yes. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. They made the cabin habitable, patched the roof, repaired the corral, and planted a small garden. Reese rode into the nearest town, Riverton, for supplies, careful to avoid Weaverville. He returned with seeds, tools, and a gold band that he slipped onto Zara's finger in a private ceremony under the cottonwood trees, with only Matthew and the mountains as witnesses. As spring gave way to summer, they settled into a rhythm. Reese bought 4 mares from a breeder in Riverton, the beginning of his breeding stock. Zara turned the cabin into a home, sewing curtains from flour sacks and fashioning furniture from crates and barrels. Matthew grew strong, his blue eyes darkening to a warm brown, his tiny fists grasping at everything within reach. In July, they made their first trip together into Riverton. Zara was nervous about being seen in public, but they needed supplies they couldn't produce themselves, and she was eager to establish connections in their new community. Riverton was smaller than Weaverville, just a cluster of buildings serving the surrounding farms and ranches. The general store's proprietor, Mrs. Chen, welcomed them warmly, cooing over Matthew while her husband helped Reese load grain and hardware into their wagon. "You must come to our social next Sunday," Mrs. Chen insisted, "after church. Everyone brings food and you can meet your neighbors." Zara hesitated, but Reese squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'd be honored," he said. The social proved less daunting than Zara had feared. The residents of Riverton were hard-working people who judged others by their character rather than their past. By day's end, Zara had invitations to join the ladies' sewing circle and promises of hand-me-down baby clothes from mothers whose children had outgrown them. As they drove home under a canopy of stars, Matthew sleeping in a makeshift cradle beside them, Zara leaned against Reese's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving us this. A home, a place where we belong." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You gave me the same thing." But their peace was shattered 3 days later. Reese was mending a fence in the north pasture when he spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Riders moving fast toward the ranch. He raced back to the cabin, bursting through the door to find Zara kneading bread dough while Matthew napped in a basket nearby. "We've got company," he said, grabbing his rifle from above the door. "Take Matthew and hide in the root cellar." Fear flashed across her face, but she moved without question, scooping up her still sleeping son and hurrying to the trap door in the kitchen floor. Only when she was safely below did Reese step onto the porch, rifle in hand. 3 riders approached, and Reese's heart sank as he recognized the bulky figure in the lead. Thomas Blackford had found them. "That's far enough," Reese called when they were still 50 yards from the cabin. The riders stopped, Thomas squinting against the afternoon sun. "Well, if it isn't the hero Cowboy," he sneered. "Where's the whore and my son?" Reese's finger tensed on the trigger. "There's no one here by that description. Turn around and ride out." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the valley. "You don't want to die for another man's leavings, Cowboy. That's my blood she's carrying around, my heir. The child is Zara's son, and mine now, by law and by choice." Reese kept his voice level, though rage coursed through him. "You gave up any claim when you beat her and left her for dead." Thomas's face darkened. "I'm a wealthy man, O'Malley. I can make this worth your while. $500 to walk away." "Not interested." "1,000 then." "You don't understand," Reese said quietly. "She's my wife. That boy is my son. There isn't enough money in California to change that." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his companions. "Kill him." The men reached for their guns, but Reese had survived a war and a decade in wild country. His rifle cracked twice in rapid succession. One man pitched backward off his horse. The other clutched his shoulder and wheeled his mount around, fleeing back the way they'd come. Thomas fumbled with his own pistol, but Reese had him in his sights. "Drop it," he ordered. "You've lost 2 men today. Don't make it 3. For a tense moment, Thomas hesitated, his face contorted with hatred. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'll be back with the law." "No, you won't." A new voice joined the standoff. Sheriff Harris from Riverton rode up, flanked by 2 deputies. Mrs. Chen sent word when she heard Blackford asking questions about the O'Malleys. Relief flooded through Reese as the sheriff dismounted. "Glad to see you, Sheriff." "Mr. Blackford," Harris said, approaching the fuming businessman. "I've got a wire from San Francisco. Seems your wife's family is mighty interested in your whereabouts. Something about embezzled funds and a pregnant mistress." The color drained from Thomas's face. "That's a lie." "Maybe so, but they're offering a substantial reward for your return, enough that I'm inclined to hold you until they send someone to collect you." The sheriff nodded to his deputies, who moved to flank Thomas. "Hands where I can see them, sir." As the deputies disarmed and bound Thomas, Reese hurried back to the cabin. "Zara," he called, opening the trap door. "It's over." She emerged from the cellar. Matthew clutched to her chest, her face pale with fear. "Thomas?" "The sheriff has him. There are charges against him in San Francisco, serious ones." Zara's knees buckled with relief, and Reese caught her, holding both her and Matthew close. "We're safe now," he whispered into her hair. "Truly safe." That night, after the sheriff and his prisoners had departed and Matthew was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Reese and Zara sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "I never thought I'd be free of him," Zara said, her head resting on Reese's shoulder. "I was always looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to find us. And now," she smiled up at him, her face luminous in the moonlight, "now we live, Reese O'Malley. We build our home, raise our son, and maybe," she placed his hand on her stomach, "maybe give Matthew some brothers and sisters." Reese stared at her in wonder. "Are you saying, Dr. Miller in Riverton confirmed it yesterday? I'm about 2 months along." Joy surged through him, so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love that had grown in his heart since that bloody evening at the Weaverville depot. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Both of you. All of you." "And we love you," she whispered back. "Our protector. Our home." As summer faded into autumn, the O'Malley ranch flourished. Reese acquired 2 more mares and a stallion with excellent bloodlines. Word spread about the quality of his stock, and buyers began making the journey to the remote valley. Zara, her pregnancy progressing smoothly, started taking in sewing work from Riverton, the first step toward her dream of opening a dress shop. Matthew took his first steps on a crisp October morning, toddling from Zara's arms to Reese's outstretched hands on the cabin porch. His delighted squeal brought tears to both their eyes. "Papa," he said clearly, patting Reese's bearded cheek. "Papa." Reese swallowed hard, looking over the boy's dark head to meet Zara's gaze. No words were needed between them. Matthew was his son in every way that mattered. In late February, as a gentle snow blanketed the valley, Zara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Dr. Miller, who had ridden out from Riverton despite the weather, pronounced them perfectly healthy. "Strong lungs on both of them," he chuckled as the cabin filled with newborn cries. "What shall we name them?" Reese asked, cradling his daughter while Zara nursed their son. Zara studied the tiny red-faced girl. "Rose," she decided, "for your mother." "And the boy?" She smiled down at the infant at her breast. "James, for your father." Reese felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had told Zara about his parents during those long evenings by the fire, about their kindness and sacrifice, about how much he missed them still. That she would honor them this way touched him deeply. "Rose and James O'Malley," he said, testing the names. "They're perfect." As spring returned to the valley, the O'Malley family settled into their expanded home. Reese had added 2 rooms to the cabin over the winter one for Matthew and one for the twins. The garden doubled in size, and a white picket fence now enclosed the yard where Matthew played under the watchful eyes of his parents. On a warm May evening, 5 years to the day since Reese had first wrapped Zara in his coat at the Weaverville depot, they sat together on a quilt spread beneath the cottonwood trees. Matthew, now 5, chased fireflies at the edge of the yard, while the twins, 15 months old, slept between them on the quilt. "I've been thinking," Reese said, watching his eldest son's delight as he captured a glowing insect in his cupped hands. "The Riverton School Board is looking for new members." Zara raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of running?" He nodded. "The children will be starting school before we know it. I want to make sure they get a good education." "Better than yours?" she teased gently. Reese had confessed once that he'd had only 3 years of formal schooling before being needed on his family's farm. "Much better," he said seriously. "I want them to have every opportunity." Zara leaned over the sleeping twins to kiss him. "They already have the most important thing, a father who loves them." Reese pulled her closer, marveling at how this woman and these children had transformed him from a drifting cowboy to a man with deep roots and a full heart. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Meeting me? Coming here?" Zara followed his gaze to the valley spread before them, the prosperous ranch with its growing herd, the neat cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, the children playing and sleeping in safety. Then she looked at her husband, at the man who had risked everything for a beaten pregnant stranger. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same crimson hues as on the day they met, Reese O'Malley held his wife close and watched his children in the gathering dusk. From drifter to family man, from solitary cowboy to loving father, the journey had been unexpected, but the destination was more perfect than he could have imagined. Matthew ran back to them, his hands still cupped around his captured firefly. "Look, Pa," he said excitedly. "It's like a little star." "It sure is, son," Reese said, making room for the boy between them on the quilt. "Just like the stars that guided me home to you and your ma." As darkness fell and the real stars emerged overhead, the O'Malley family lingered beneath the cottonwood trees, bound together by love that had begun with an act of courage and kindness on a bloody depot platform in Weaverville. Over the next decade, the O'Malley Ranch grew into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Northern California. Reese's careful selection of bloodlines and Zara's meticulous record-keeping built them a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far as Oregon and Nevada. Matthew, at 15, showed his father's gift with horses and his mother's quick intelligence. He excelled at the Riverton School, where Reese now served as school board president. The twins, James and Rose, were inseparable 10-year-olds who divided their time between helping with the ranch and losing themselves in the books that Zara ordered regularly from San Francisco. Zara had realized her dream as well, opening a small dress shop in Riverton that catered to the growing community's desire for fashion that balanced practicality with elegance. 2 days a week, she made the trip into town, leaving the younger children with Reese or Mrs. Jenkins, who had become like a grandmother to the O'Malley brood after her husband passed away. Their family had grown once more 7 years after the twins' birth, with the arrival of a second daughter, Lily, who now toddled around the ranch with the determination that made her parents laugh. On a crisp autumn day in 1888, the family gathered on the porch of their home, no longer the simple cabin of their early years, but a sprawling 2-story house built from locally milled timber. They watched as a carriage made its way up the long drive from the main road, an unusual sight that brought Matthew running from the corral and the twins from the barn. "Are we expecting visitors, Pa?" Matthew asked, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. "Not that I know of," Reese replied, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver he still kept at his hip, old habits dying hard. As the carriage drew closer, Zara gasped softly. "Reese, look at the crest on the door." The vehicle bore the emblem of one of San Francisco's oldest banking families, the Blackfords. Reese stepped in front of his family as the carriage stopped before the house. The driver, a uniformed man in his 50s, descended and opened the door with a formal bow. A woman emerged, elegantly dressed in traveling clothes that spoke of wealth and position. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that took in the scene before her with calm assessment. "Mr. and Mrs. O'Malley?" she inquired, her voice cultured but kind. "I'm Reese O'Malley," Reese confirmed cautiously. "This is my wife, Zara." The woman inclined her head. "I'm Eleanor Blackford, Thomas's widow." A tense silence fell over the porch. 15 years had passed since Thomas Blackford had threatened their family, since he had been taken back to San Francisco to face charges of embezzlement and fraud. They had learned through newspaper accounts that he had been convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Beyond that, they had heard nothing, preferring to leave that chapter of their lives firmly in the past. "May I speak with you?" Eleanor asked, her gaze moving to the children clustered behind their parents. "Privately, perhaps?" Zara stepped forward, her initial shock giving way to the gracious hospitality for which she had become known in Riverton. "Of course. Please come inside." As the children were sent to complete their chores, Reese and Zara led their unexpected visitor into the parlor. Eleanor Blackford settled onto a chair, her posture perfect, but her expression betraying a hint of nervousness. "I suppose you're wondering why I've come all this way," she began. "The thought did cross our minds," Reese said, his tone neutral as he took a seat beside Zara on the sofa. Eleanor's gaze lingered on Matthew, visible through the window, as he returned to the horses in the corral. "My husband died 3 months ago. Consumption, contracted in prison. Before he died, he confessed many things to me, including the existence of a child." Zara tensed, and Reese covered her hand with his. "Matthew is our son," he said firmly, "in every way that matters." "I understand that," Eleanor said quickly. "I haven't come to make any claim. Quite the opposite, in fact." She opened her handbag and withdrew an envelope. "Thomas wronged you terribly, Mrs. O'Malley. Both of you. This is a small attempt to make amends." She handed the envelope to Zara, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a legal document and a bank draft for a sum that made her gasp. "It's a trust," Eleanor explained, "for Matthew's education and future, and for your other children as well. Thomas's father left a considerable estate, which passed to me upon Thomas's death. I have no children of my own, and she hesitated. "I couldn't bear the thought that an innocent child might suffer because of my husband's actions." Reese studied the elegant woman before them. "Mrs. Blackford, this is very generous, but—" "Please," she interrupted. "I'm not asking for anything in return. No acknowledgement, no relationship if you don't wish it. I simply want to do what's right." Her composed facade cracked slightly. "Thomas and I had a complicated marriage. I knew of his indiscretions, but I never knew he had gone so far as to threaten violence against a woman carrying his child. Had I known—" "You couldn't have stopped him," Zara said gently, surprising herself with the compassion she felt for this woman who had unknowingly shared her husband with her all those years ago. Eleanor nodded gratefully. "Perhaps not, but I can do this now." She rose, smoothing her skirts. "I'll leave you to discuss it. The trust is established regardless of your decision. If you choose not to use it, it will remain in the bank until Matthew turns 21. As she moved toward the door, she paused. "Your children are beautiful, Mrs. O'Malley. You've built a wonderful life here." "Thank you," Zara said, rising to show her out. Would you like to meet them properly before you go?" Eleanor's carefully controlled expression softened with surprise and gratitude. "I would like that very much." That evening, after Eleanor Blackford had departed and the children were asleep, Reese and Zara sat before the fire in their bedroom, the trust documents spread on the table between them. "What do you think we should do?" Zara asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Reese stared into the flames, considering. The money would ensure all the children could attend university if they wanted. Matthews talked about veterinary school in the East. "But it comes from Thomas," Zara said quietly. "The man who tried to kill us." "It comes from Eleanor," Reese corrected, "a woman who had nothing to do with Thomas's actions but is trying to make things right." He turned to face his wife. "But it's your decision, Zara. You suffered the most at his hands." Zara thought of Eleanor Blackford's dignified sadness, of the graciousness with which she had spoken to the children, asking about their interests and dreams with genuine curiosity. She thought of Matthew's excitement when he'd mentioned his hope to study animal medicine, and of the twins' shared love of books and learning. "I think we should accept it," she said finally, "not for Thomas's sake, but for the children's, and perhaps a little for Eleanor's peace of mind as well." Reese nodded, pulling her into his arms. "You have the most generous heart of anyone I've ever known, Zara O'Malley. I learned from the man who wrapped a beaten pregnant stranger in his coat and carried her to safety," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his jaw, now streaked with silver that matched her own. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life on the O'Malley ranch continued its peaceful rhythm. Matthew applied to veterinary programs in Boston and Philadelphia with Eleanor Blackford's trust, ensuring he could afford the tuition and travel. The twins excelled in school, with Rose showing a talent for mathematics that surprised her teachers, and James developing his mother's eye for design and color. Little Lily, now 3, followed her older siblings everywhere, soaking up their knowledge and adventures like a sponge. Zara's dress shop expanded to include a millinery section, while Reese's horse breeding operation grew to include a training program that attracted clients from across the western states. On Christmas Eve, 1890, the family gathered around the large table in their dining room. Candles flickered in the greenery Zara had arranged down the center, and the scent of pine mixed with the aromas of roast turkey and apple pie. Outside, snow fell gently, transforming the valley into a scene from a storybook. "Before we eat," Reese said, rising from his place at the head of the table, "I'd like to propose a toast." The children, even little Lily in her booster seat, raised their glasses of cider expectantly. "To family," Reese said, his gaze moving from one beloved face to another before coming to rest on Zara. "To love that finds us when we least expect it and changes us forever." "To love," the family echoed, glasses clinking. As they enjoyed their feast, sharing stories and laughter, Zara caught Reese watching her from across the table, his eyes filled with the same tenderness she had glimpsed on that long-ago evening at the Weaverville depot. She smiled back, her heart full to bursting with the life they had built together. Later, when the children were abed and they stood alone in the quiet house, watching the snow through the parlor window, Reese wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Do you remember that first Christmas?" he asked softly. "In the old cabin, with just the 3 of us?" Zara leaned back against him, remembering. Matthew had been only 9 months old, and they had been married less than a year. They'd had little in the way of material possessions, but they'd felt rich beyond measure. "You carved that little wooden horse for Matthew," she recalled. "He dragged it everywhere until it was smooth as silk from his hands." "He still has it," Reese said. "I saw it on his bookshelf last week." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform their world. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zara asked after a while. "That night when you found me at the depot, did you imagine we'd have all this?" Reese turned her in his arms, his hands cradling her face as tenderly as they had on the day they met. "I couldn't have imagined anything this perfect," he said, "but I knew from the first moment I held you that I'd never let you go." "I'm glad you didn't," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of the past and creating a clean slate for the future. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the dying fire, Reese and Zara O'Malley celebrated the journey that had begun with violence and fear, but had led to a life filled with love, family, and the quiet joy of belonging. And in the bedrooms above, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished, protected, and free to dream. Just as their parents had dreamed on a blood-soaked evening at the Weaverville depot, of a future that seemed impossible but had become more beautiful than either could have imagined. In the years that followed, the O'Malley family continued to thrive. Matthew completed his veterinary studies in Philadelphia, returning to Northern California to establish a practice that served ranches throughout the region. He married Emily Farrell, the daughter of Riverton's newspaper publisher, and built a house on the northern edge of the O'Malley property. The twins pursued their own paths with the same determination that had characterized them since childhood. Rose attended the University of California, one of the few women in her mathematics class, eventually returning to teach at the school in Riverton. James studied architecture in San Francisco, his designs blending practicality with beauty in a way that reflected both his father's solidity and his mother's artistic eye. Lily, the baby of the family, grew into a young woman with her mother's quiet strength and her father's affinity for horses. She took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Reese and Zara entered their 60s, allowing them to enjoy their growing brood of grandchildren. On a golden afternoon in the autumn of 1905, more than 30 years after their first meeting, Reese and Zara sat on the wide porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Matthew's 3 boys and Rose's twin daughters chased each other around the old cottonwood trees, their laughter carried on the gentle breeze. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Reese asked, his hand covering Zara's on the arm of her rocking chair. "When the porch was just a few rough boards and the house was barely more than a cabin?" Zara smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "You promised me we'd build something good here, something that would last." "Did I keep my promise?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of the insecurity that sometimes still surfaced in quiet moments. Zara looked out at their domain, the prosperous ranch, the orchard they'd planted 20 years ago, now heavy with fruit, the new barn built with James's architectural expertise, the flower gardens Lily tended with her mother's passion for beauty. Beyond the immediate property, she could see the roof of Matthew's house and, in the distance, the spire of the Riverton church where their children had been baptized and married. But more than these physical manifestations of their life together, she thought of the less tangible legacy they'd created, the love that bound their family across generations, the respect they'd earned in the community. The way their story of a cowboy who had wrapped a beaten pregnant woman in his coat at a depot and changed both their lives forever had become something of a legend in Riverton, a testament to courage and compassion. "You more than kept it, Reese O'Malley," she said, turning to meet his gaze. His hair was white now, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had first caught her attention. "You exceeded it in ways I never could have imagined." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We did it together." "Grammy, Grandpa," 5-year-old Sarah, Rose's daughter, came running up the steps, her face flushed with excitement. "Tell us the story again, about how you met." The other children crowded onto the porch behind her, their eyes bright with anticipation. Though they had heard the tale countless times, it never lost its magic for them. "Well," Reese began, settling back in his chair as the children arranged themselves at his feet, "it was a cold evening in Weaverville, back in 1873. As he spoke, Zara watched the faces of their grandchildren, saw them lean forward at the dramatic moments, saw their indignation at the villain and their satisfaction at justice served. She marveled at how a story that had begun with pain and fear had transformed, through time and love, into a family legend of hope and courage. When Reese reached the part where he had wrapped her in his coat, Sarah sighed dreamily. "That's the most romantic thing ever," she declared. Zara caught Reese's eye over the children's heads, a lifetime of shared memories passing between them in a single glance. "It was just the beginning," she told her granddaughter softly. "The most romantic parts came later, in all the small moments that make up a life together." That evening, as twilight painted the valley in shades of purple and gold, Reese and Zara walked hand in hand to the ridge overlooking their land. It was a ritual they had observed for decades, this quiet communion at day's end. "I got a letter from Eleanor today," Zara said as they watched the first stars appear. "She's coming for Christmas." Eleanor Blackford had become an unexpected addition to their extended family over the years. After her initial visit, she'd corresponded regularly with Zara and eventually with Matthew as well. Her generosity had extended beyond the trust fund to include gifts for all the children on birthdays and holidays, visits during important milestones, and a genuine interest in their lives and accomplishments. "The children will be pleased," Reese said, Lily especially. Lily had formed a particular bond with the elegant San Franciscan, whose knowledge of art and literature had opened new worlds for the youngest O'Malley. "She's bringing James's fiancée with her," Zara added. "She wants to help with the wedding plans." Reese chuckled. "Between you, Eleanor, and Catherine's mother, that poor girl won't have a decision left to make." "We'll be models of restraint," Zara promised, though her eyes twinkled with the excitement all mothers feel at a child's wedding. As darkness settled over the valley and the household behind them quieted for the night, they remained on the ridge, 2 figures silhouetted against the star-filled sky. After a while, Reese turned to Zara, taking both her hands in his. "Do you know what day it is?" he asked. She tilted her head, considering. "Tuesday." He smiled, the smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "It's 32 years to the day since I first saw you at that depot." Zara's eyes widened. She had lost track of the exact date over the years, though they always celebrated the anniversary of their meeting in the spring. "So it is," she said softly. "I've been thinking," Reese continued, "we've built a good life here, raised our children, seen them settled. The ranch is thriving under Lily's management." "Yes," Zara agreed, wondering where he was leading. "How would you feel about an adventure?" His eyes held a spark of the restlessness that had characterized the young cowboy she'd first met. "I've always wanted to see the ocean, the real ocean, not just San Francisco Bay, and the redwood forests up north, and maybe even the Grand Canyon." Zara stared at him in surprise. In all their years together, Reese had rarely expressed a desire to travel far from the ranch. "You want to take a trip? More than a trip, a journey?" His hands tightened on hers. "We've spent our lives building a home, Zara. I think maybe it's time we explored a bit of the world beyond it, while we still can." The idea caught fire in Zara's imagination. They were both still healthy and strong, despite their years. The children were grown, the ranch secure. Why shouldn't they see some of the wonders they'd only read about? "Yes," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Let's do it. Let's have an adventure." Reese pulled her into his arms, his embrace as warm and solid as it had been on that first night. "I love you, Zara O'Malley, as much today as I did when I first wrapped you in my coat, and more with each passing year." "And I love you," she whispered against his chest. "My hero, my home." They stood together on the ridge overlooking the life they had built, their hearts full with memories of the past and anticipation of new adventures to come. The beaten woman at the depot and the cowboy who had saved her had traveled a long road together, one marked by challenges and triumphs, joy and sorrow, but always, always by love. As the moon rose over the valley, casting silver light over the land that had witnessed their story, Reese and Zara O'Malley turned toward home, hand in hand as they had been from the beginning. Behind them, the stars watched over the ranch where their legacy would continue long after they were gone, in the lives of their children and grandchildren, and in the stories that would be told for generations about the couple whose love had begun with a simple act of kindness on a blood-soaked evening at the Weaverville Depot.